The Great Lakes are known for great big ships. Now, take a look at those ships at a little closer and a little more little with Maritime Miniatures at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum. Joining us now to talk about the exhibit is Assistant Curator for the Dossin Great Lakes Museum and the Detroit Historical Society, Bill Pringle. Bill, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Tyler. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you on with us. So first off, can you tell us about the Dossin Great Lakes Museum? For those that may not be familiar, they may be familiar with the Detroit Historical Society or other local historical societies and the work that they do, but what can people find during normal times at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Detroit Historical Society, we operate both the Detroit Historical Museum in Midtown Detroit, there on Woodward. We also operate the Dossin Great Lakes Museum on Belle Isle. So at both of those museums, you're going to find a lot of great exhibits talking about Detroit history. At the Detroit Historical Museum, where we've got a lot of great permanent exhibits and great changing exhibits as well. And then, of course, at the Dossin Museum on Belle Isle, that's going to be mostly focused on maritime history, specifically the Great Lakes and the Detroit River region. And we're actually right now celebrating our centennial, the Detroit Historical Society. We were founded 100 years ago. And because of that, we're doing a lot of special stuff, a lot of special exhibits, programs, and that sort of thing.
And so now through May 8th, you're holding a special exhibition entitled Maritime Miniatures, The Art of the Ship Model. Talk to us about that exhibit and what people can explore when they visit this. Because not only is this exploring classic ships and historically significant ships, but also model ship making as well.
Yeah, that's right. So since this is our centennial and we're holding these special exhibits, the ship models in our collection have a really special place in the DNA of the Historical Society. So way back, the original Maritime Museum in Detroit was on board an actual ship, the JT Wing. It was the Museum of Great Lakes History. And back then when they were on that ship, the original curator, he put together a group known as the Great Lakes Model Shipbuilders Guild, who were tasked with creating model ships, Great Lakes specific model ships. Most of them in the same scale, 1/8 scale, to give visitors a sense of what those ships may have looked like if they were next to each other, to help put that in perspective. But since way back then, when the museum opened in 1949, we have been collecting this series of model ships. And they have proven to be one of the most popular sections in our collection. We get people asking all the time, oh, we want to see the model ships. We want to see more model ships. So we thought, with this being our centennial, this was a great opportunity to put as many of those on display as possible. So we're considering this absolutely a special exhibit because at the Dossin, we generally have one space in the museum that hosts rotating exhibitions. The reason Maritime Miniatures is special is because not only is it occupying that main changing exhibition space, but these models are spread throughout the entire museum. So it's really a total takeover in an effort to get out of storage as many models as possible, and to tell a lot of these stories that are behind the models themselves and the ships depicted in model form. And so because of that, it really is a special exhibition for us. So throughout our main exhibits, as soon as you come in the front door, you're going to start seeing ship models of lots of different sizes, lots of different forms, different types of ships, passenger ships, bulk freight carriers, that sort of thing. You're going to see them throughout the museum in places where you wouldn't see them before.
We're joined by Bill Pringle, the Assistant Curator at the Detroit Historical Society, as well as the Dossin Great Lakes Museum located on Belle Isle in Detroit. Joining us on the Michigan MegaCast, there are many infamous ships and vessels that have traveled the Great Lakes over the course of recorded history. What will be some of those infamous ships that will be having models at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum during this Maritime Miniatures exhibit?
Sure, there are plenty of famous ships that have sailed around the Great Lakes in the long history that we've been taking to the waters here. Of course, some of the ones that you may recognize, some of them are on permanent display, but of course, there's the Edmund Fitzgerald. That's recognizable to a lot of folks. We have French explorer Lassalle's Griffin ship, one of the earliest ships on the Great Lakes. But of course, with close to 150 different models now on display, there's a lot to pick from. I can go through some of my favorites that are on display right now. One of my favorites, maybe my absolute favorite in the collection, is a model of a passenger steamship called the Mayflower. The reason it's one of my favorites is because it's actually the oldest model ship in our collection. It was built in 1854. So it's over 160 years old. And it's relatively big too. And it's special not only because it's so old and it's survived this long and gives us a great look into how the ship looked at the time, because it was built at the time the ship was actually sailing, but also because the model ship was entered into competition at the Michigan State Fair, where it actually won a prize. And the model builder actually attached the medallion that he won as a prize to the front deck of the ship, which I think is a really neat additional piece of history for not only that model, but the ship as well. And for many of the models on display, in the exhibit, you're going to be learning about not only the model and the model maker, but the hidden background behind a lot of these ships as well. Another one close to the Mayflower on display is a ship called the Christopher Columbus. Now, this was what was known as a whaleback ship. This is a relatively short-lived Great Lakes innovation. The hull shape looks like a whale's back, as you might have guessed. But this was one of the only passenger-carrying whaleback ships on the Great Lakes. And it's particularly special because it was built to carry passengers from downtown Chicago to the fairgrounds for the famous Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And it took thousands, some estimates say millions of passengers between Chicago and the fairgrounds. So that's a really interesting one as well. And just to highlight one more, I guess we have another called the Philo Parsons, which was another passenger steamer. I guess I like passenger steamers. That was active mostly on Lake Erie. And this one was part of a Confederate plot during the Civil War to gain a presence in the Great Lakes. It was actually taken over by Confederate soldiers as a means to free some prisoners from a prison camp near Sandusky. And then they would go on to, attack ports around the Great Lakes and that sort of thing. But their plot was actually, they gave it up as they had learned that they suspected that the Union troops on Lake Erie had learned of their plot, which they had. So they abandoned it and snuck back through to where they boarded, which was in Canada. So many interesting stories in these models and the ships themselves. So, and like you said, we go into how models are built as well. There's a lot of different ways to build models, from the beginner cracking open a kit, which will help walk them through each step of the way, and from the more complicated methods. I think it's interesting personally that a lot of model ships are built in roughly the same way actual wooden ships were built, which is that sort of keel bulkhead frame and then wood planking over the sides of it, just scaled down quite a bit. So there's a lot going on in this exhibit, and I think folks that have been able to visit so far have come away learning a lot.
We're joined by Bill Pringle, the assistant curator at the Detroit Historical Society, as well as the Dossin Great Lakes Museum, joining us on the Michigan MegaCast. So a lot of these ships had sailed there regular life, had been retired, and then were of course cemented in maritime history in Michigan, and now they're going to be on display as model ships at the Dossin Great Lakes Museum during the Maritime Miniatures exhibit. Others, unfortunately, sank. Some of them were found, some of them were not found. Were some of those that were not found also going to be featured so people can see kind of what these vessels looked like during their operational time before the tragic loss of these vessels?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the first curator would often say that this was a fleet of ghost ships, this fleet of his model ships, because, while they're not necessarily around anymore, we still get to see them and learn from them, learn about the way they worked, the way they did business, what innovations they brought to the table and changed shipping in the Great Lakes, both for freight and passenger. But my mind immediately goes to the model we have of the Griffin that I mentioned earlier. We actually aren't completely sure what that ship looked like, because there weren't really any plans to draw from, and the wreckage was never found. So the model we have in our collection is based on several assumptions of what those ships may have looked like at the time. So that's what my mind immediately jumps to when we talk about lost ships, particularly ghost ships. I think the other side of the coin is interesting too, because some of the ore carriers, the freighters that we have on display, are actually still working ships right now. You can see them going up and down the river and around the Great Lakes. So we really have both ends of that spectrum on display right now.
We're joined by Bill Pringle, the assistant curator at the Detroit Historical Society, as well as the Dossin Great Lakes Museum. Bill, another couple minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. Anything else at this time that would be interesting for our audience to know about the Dossin Great Lakes Museum, about work being done through the Detroit Historical Society, or other programs and exhibits that may be of interest coming up?
Sure. One thing that I would really like to stress is the extremely fragile nature of these model ships. And as such, as part of this special exhibition, we're actually admitting folks with a $5 donation, which is something a little bit different for us. But because of that support that we are getting through those donations, we are going to be able to put those funds directly towards restoring some of the damaged ships, paying for that continued upkeep that's so necessary, and also for keeping them safe in storage, new enclosures and that sort of thing. Because even when properly stored and cared for, these models, time can really take their toll. And all it can take is one little nudge to break something. And of course, these have been in our collection for a long, long time. And so while the majority of them are in really great condition, we would love to see some of them restored to closer what they would have looked like when they were completed by their model builder. And so during this run, this special run, we really appreciate that support from our visitors in that small donation, as that's going to be going directly to helping those artifacts that are on display. So again, I appreciate folks visiting, making that contribution towards this cause.
Bill, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler.